The streets of New York buzzed with energy. It was a sunny afternoon, but the weight of the world sat heavily on young Ella's shoulders. At just 10 years old, she wandered through the crowded sidewalks, her shoes falling apart with every step. The soles were worn so thin that she could feel the rough pavement beneath her feet. People passed her by, their faces indifferent, their steps hurried. In the distance, an armored black SUV pulled up. The crowd stirred with curiosity as Barron Trump, towering and composed, stepped out. His bodyguards flanked him, their sharp suits and earpieces screaming importance. He was on his way to an event, his demeanor calm yet focused. Ella noticed the commotion, but paid no mind. She was too busy adjusting the duct tape holding her shoes together. But Barron's sharp eyes caught sight of her. Something about the image, her small frame, her downcast eyes, and the state of her shoes made him stop. "Sir, we should keep moving," one of his guards urged. But Barron didn't move. His gaze lingered on Ella. Who was she? And why was she alone, looking so lost? Barron's heart tugged in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen countless faces in his life, rich, powerful, smiling for cameras. But Ella's face was different. It was pure, raw, and unguarded. "Wait," he told his guards, brushing off their protests. The crowd murmured as Barron, the son of one of the world's most famous families, began walking toward a stranger, a little girl who didn't even notice him approaching. Ella glanced up when she felt a shadow fall over her. Her big brown eyes met his, confused and wary. She recognized him, of course. Who didn't? But why was he looking at her? "Hi," Barron said softly, crouching down to her level. His voice was calm but filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Ella didn't know how to answer. No one had asked her that in a long time. She looked down at her shoes, then back at him, her lips trembling. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. Barron glanced at her shoes. The sight made his chest tighten. He knew then that he couldn't just walk away. Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He scribbled something quickly, tore the page, and handed it to one of his guards. "Find out her name," he instructed. The guard hesitated. "Sir, we really need to do it," Barron said firmly. There was no arguing with him. Ella watched, confused, as the guard stepped forward. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Ella," she said, her voice barely audible. Barron smiled, offering her a reassuring nod. "Ella, I'd like to help you. Is that okay?" Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, let alone someone so important. The crowd around them grew silent, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. Ella clutched her shoes tightly, her tiny hands trembling. Whatever Barron was planning, she could feel it was going to change her life forever. The crowd grew larger as whispers filled the air. Some people pulled out their phones, recording the unusual sight of Barron Trump kneeling before a little girl. Ella's face was flushed red with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. She tugged at the hem of her jacket, unsure of what to do. Barron noticed her discomfort and spoke gently. "Ella, do you have someone with you? Your parents, maybe?" She hesitated. "No, I don't." His heart ached. He glanced at the guard standing nearby, who gave him a subtle shake of his head, confirming that there was no one else in sight. Suddenly, Ella tried to back away. "I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to help me." Barron's brow furrowed. "Why not?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Because no one ever does," she whispered. The weight of her words hit him like a blow. He felt an unfamiliar anger rise within him, not at her, but at the world that had failed her. "Not today," he said firmly. "Today someone will." Ella blinked, startled. Was it possible? Could someone actually care? "Sir, we really must leave," one of the guards urged again. But Barron was resolute. He turned to Ella. "Can I see your shoes?" Ella hesitated, confused. Slowly, she lifted her foot, revealing the cracked soles held together by tape. The sight was worse up close. He couldn't imagine how she'd walked around for so long in those. Without a word, Barron stood and gestured to his assistant, who had been waiting nearby. "Find the nearest shoe store. I don't care how far it is. Get something for her." "Sir, that might take some time," the assistant said, flustered. Barron shook his head. "Then we'll wait." Ella's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that," she said quickly. "I want to," he replied. His voice was steady, his expression serious. The assistant hurried off, leaving Barron and Ella standing amidst the murmuring crowd. Some people clapped, others simply watched in awe. Ella's hands fidgeted nervously as she avoided eye contact with the onlookers. Barron leaned closer and said quietly, "Don't worry about them. Right now it's just you and me." Ella nodded, a small spark of hope flickering in her eyes. The minutes dragged by as Barron and Ella stood together. His guards had formed a protective barrier around them, keeping the growing crowd at bay. A little boy from the onlookers suddenly shouted, "Barron's a hero!" and the crowd erupted into cheers. Ella blushed, gripping her shoes tightly. She still couldn't understand why someone like him, a billionaire's son, surrounded by cameras and guards, would care about her. Then, a woman from the crowd stepped forward. She looked at Ella with kind eyes. "Do you have a home, sweetheart?" Ella glanced nervously at Barron, unsure how to answer. Barron spoke for her, his voice low but firm. "She's with me now." The woman looked surprised but nodded respectfully. Barron's tone left no room for argument. Moments later, the assistant returned, holding a bright red shoebox. He handed it to Barron, who knelt down once more. "These are for you," he said, opening the box to reveal a pair of shiny white sneakers. Ella stared at them, her hands trembling. "Are they really for me?" "They're yours," Barron said, "and you'll never have to walk in broken shoes again." Ella stared at the sneakers in disbelief. Her small, trembling hands hovered over the pristine white shoes, afraid to touch them. She had never owned anything new, let alone something as beautiful as this. Barron smiled softly. "Go ahead, try them on." The crowd fell silent, their eyes glued to the moment. Ella hesitated, then slowly removed her worn-out shoes, revealing her blistered and swollen feet. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, but Barron's face remained calm and compassionate. Carefully, Ella slid her feet into the new sneakers. They fit perfectly. Her face lit up, and for the first time she smiled, a small, shy smile that tugged at everyone's heart. "They're amazing," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Barron reached out and gently patted her shoulder. "You deserve them," he said. Tears streamed down her face, and she threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. The crowd erupted into applause, some wiping their own tears. Barron froze for a moment, then hugged her back, his own eyes glistening. Unbeknownst to them, someone in the crowd was live-streaming the entire scene. The video was already going viral. By the time Barron and Ella left the crowd, the video of their interaction had spread across social media like wildfire. Comments flooded in. "This is humanity at its best." "Barron Trump just restored my faith in the world." "Who is the little girl? How can we help her?" Barron's phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, but he ignored them. His focus remained on Ella, who now walked confidently beside him in her new sneakers. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "To get you something to eat," Barron replied, glancing down at her. "You're probably hungry." Ella nodded, her stomach growling in agreement. They entered a small cafe, much to the shock of the staff and patrons. Barron's bodyguards quickly secured the area, ensuring their privacy. Ella sat nervously at the table, her legs swinging beneath her seat. Barron ordered for both of them, choosing warm, hearty meals. When the food arrived, Ella hesitated again, unsure if she was allowed to eat. "It's for you," Barron reassured her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took her first bite. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," Barron said softly. As Ella ate, Barron leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Ella, I need to ask you something. Where are your parents?" Her hands froze mid-bite. She looked down at her plate, avoiding his gaze. I don't have any," she admitted quietly. Barron's heart sank. "Who takes care of you?" She shrugged. "No one. I've been on my own for a while." Barron clenched his fists under the table, struggling to control his emotions. How could someone so young be left to fend for herself? "Where do you sleep?" he asked gently. "Anywhere I can," she replied, her voice trembling. "Sometimes shelters. Sometimes the streets." Barron leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He couldn't just walk away from her. She needed more than shoes and a meal. She needed a home, safety, and a chance at a better life. "Ella," he said firmly, "that ends today. You're not alone anymore." Her eyes widened, filling with tears once again. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Barron said, his voice steady, "I'm going to help you, no matter what it takes." Barron sat back in his chair, his mind racing. How could someone like Ella, so young and vulnerable, have slipped through the cracks of society? He glanced at her, her small hands clutching the fork as she finished the last bite of her meal. "Ella," he began carefully, "if you could have anything right now, what would it be?" She paused, her eyes widening. "Anything?" "Yes, anything," Barron said softly, leaning closer. Her lips quivered as she thought. I just want to feel safe," she admitted, her voice breaking. Barron nodded, his chest tightening. "You will be, I promise." He signaled to one of his guards, who approached discreetly. "Contact my family's foundation," he instructed in a low voice. "I want immediate assistance for her. Shelter, care, education, everything." The guard nodded, understanding the urgency. Ella looked at Barron, confusion and hope flickering in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Barron smiled gently. "Because sometimes the right thing to do isn't about what you have. It's about what you can give." Ella's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time she whispered, "Thank you." Meanwhile, the video of Barron's interaction with Ella had reached millions online. People around the world watched in awe as the son of a billionaire knelt to help a little girl. The comments poured in. "This brought me to tears. We need more people like him. Does anyone know who the girl is? I want to help too. Barron Trump just set an example for all of us." News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it "The Day Compassion Won." Reporters scrambled to learn more about Ella and her story. But Barron, ever private, declined all interviews. "Focus on her, not me," he told his assistant. Back at the cafe, Ella began to feel the weight of the attention. People whispered and pointed as they passed by the window. She shrank in her seat, overwhelmed. Noticing her discomfort, Barron spoke gently. "Don't worry about them. You're safe now." She nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks. "I've never been safe before," she admitted. Barron's jaw tightened. He vowed silently that he would change that, no matter what it took. After leaving the cafe, Barron took Ella to a nearby hotel where his team had arranged a temporary suite for her. She hesitated at the grand entrance, her small frame dwarfed by the marble columns and glittering chandeliers. "This is for me?" she asked in disbelief. "For now," Barron said, smiling, "until we figure out something more permanent." As they entered the suite, Ella's eyes widened at the sight of the plush furniture and sparkling view of the city. She turned to Barron, her expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. Barron knelt to her level, his expression serious. "Because I've been given so much in life, it's only right that I share it with someone who deserves it. And you, Ella, deserve it." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." Barron smiled. "Get used to it. This is just the beginning." As she hugged him tightly, Barron felt something shift in his heart. This wasn't just a gesture, it was a promise. That night, Ella sat on the edge of the luxurious bed in the suite, her hands gripping the soft sheets. The room was everything she'd never dared to dream of. Bright, warm, and safe. Yet, a heavy unease lingered in her chest. She thought back to the streets where she had spent so many cold nights, her only companions the distant hum of cars and the biting wind. She had grown used to being invisible, surviving on scraps and fleeting moments of kindness from strangers. But Barron wasn't like anyone she'd met before. His kindness felt genuine, almost too good to be true. "Why me?" she whispered to herself. Barron, who had just entered the room with a plate of cookies and milk, overheard her. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he said, setting the plate on the table. Ella looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "What if I don't know how to take it?" Barron knelt beside her, his expression soft yet determined. "Then I'll help you figure it out, together." For the first time, Ella felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. The next morning, Barron's phone buzzed relentlessly. News stations, philanthropists, and social workers were reaching out, all wanting to help Ella. His assistant handed him the phone. "You're trending again, sir," the assistant said, scrolling through the headlines. Barron sighed, scanning the messages. Among the chaos was a call from his mother. He picked up. "Barron." Her warm voice filled the line. "I saw what you did. I'm so proud of you." He smiled softly. "Thanks, Mom. But it's not about me. It's about her." "She deserves everything you're giving her," she said, her tone serious. "Let me know how I can help." Barron promised to keep her updated before hanging up. He turned to Ella, who was nibbling on a cookie at the table. "Ella, how would you feel about meeting someone who can help us?" he asked. Ella's eyes widened. "Who?" "Someone who can make sure you have everything you need," Barron said gently. "A fresh start." Ella hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "Will you stay with me?" Barron nodded. "I'll be right here." Later that day, Barron arranged for a meeting with a representative from his family's foundation. Ella sat nervously on the couch, her small hands gripping her knees. "Ella," the representative began kindly, "Barron has told us about your story, and we want to help. Would you like to attend a school where you can learn, make friends, and be safe?" Ella's lips quivered. "A school? For me?" "Yes," the representative replied, smiling. "And we can also find you a permanent home where you'll be cared for." Ella turned to Barron, her eyes searching his face. "What if I mess it up?" Barron reached for her hand. "You won't. And even if you stumble, I'll be here to catch you." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I want to try." The representative nodded, pleased. "We'll make all the arrangements. You're going to have a bright future, Ella." As the meeting ended, Ella turned to Barron and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Barron smiled. "This is just the beginning, Ella. The best is yet to come." As Ella's story spread, the world seemed to rally around her. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Ella deserves better" and "Kindness wins." Donations poured into the Trump Foundation with messages attached, "For Ella and every child like her. Let's make a difference together. Barron Trump has restored my faith in humanity." Barron watched the responses from his office, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. His assistant handed him a stack of letters from people who had been inspired by his actions. "You've started something bigger than just helping one girl," she said. But not everyone was supportive. Critics online questioned his motives, accusing him of using Ella's plight for publicity. Barron ignored the negativity, but Ella wasn't as unaffected. "Do people think you're only helping me because you're famous?" she asked hesitantly. Barron knelt beside her, his tone firm but gentle. Ella, I didn't help you for anyone else. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. What others think doesn't matter. Her lips quivered as she whispered, You really mean that? Every word, he assured her. In that moment, Ella realized she had finally found someone who believed in her without expecting anything in return. The Trump Foundation organized a press conference to officially announce Ella's new beginning. Barron was hesitant to involve the media, but the foundation convinced him it could inspire more people to help children in need. Ella stood nervously beside Barron as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Despite her fear, she held her head high. Barron squeezed her hand reassuringly. Ladies and gentlemen, the foundation's representative began. We are proud to introduce Ella, a brave young girl who has touched all of our hearts. Thanks to the generosity of Barron Trump and our supporters, Ella will now have the resources to thrive. The crowd erupted in applause. Ella's cheeks flushed as she glanced up at Barron, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. As the press conference ended, Barron took Ella aside. Remember, this is just the start. You're going to do amazing things, Ella. Tears filled her eyes as she hugged him tightly. I wouldn't be here without you, she said. And I wouldn't be the person I am without you, Barron replied, his voice thick with emotion. Months later, Ella stood on the stage of her new school, delivering a speech to her classmates. She wore a bright smile and a pair of polished shoes, a far cry from the worn-out ones she had once owned. I used to think I didn't matter, she began, her voice steady. But someone saw me, believed in me, and changed my life. That someone was Barron Trump. In the audience, Barron sat quietly, a proud smile on his face. Ella's story had come full circle, and her transformation inspired everyone who heard it. As the crowd erupted in applause, Ella caught Barron's eye and mouthed, Thank you. Barron nodded, his heart full. He had set out to help one girl, but in doing so, he had changed the lives of many. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel. Like and share this video to spread the message of kindness, and let us know in the comments how you plan to make a difference. Together, we can create a world where every child like Ella gets a second chance. Your support means more than you know.